Hi, Dr. Pat here. We're working on word problems that will deal with systems of equations and matrices, and I'm going to do another example, which will be slightly different than the previous one. So you may recall from my previous video, I was looking at a word problem that had totals in it. That was the key, totals, and I made a chart from it. This one, this word problem is going to be slightly different. This one's going to be about comparing the different variables, comparing things. So here's the example that I have. So go ahead, put this on pause, take a moment, copy this down because we'll be referring to this throughout the video. Okay, so now that you got it copied, let's go through it. Now remember, one of the things that I like to do is I like to go to the end of the word problem to figure out what we're trying to find. Now this Pieboy Tracks company, they basically want us to figure out how much is earned in three of the categories. The categories that they have are revenue from the oldies, revenue from soundtracks that they do from movies and stuff, and then revenue from country music. So those are the three categories that we have. We're looking for the dollar amount that we have. And I just randomly picked X, Y, and Z as X for oldies, Y is for soundtracks, Z for country. Does not matter who you call X, Y, and Z as long as you're consistent from that point on. So that's the thing. Doesn't matter who you call the labels, but once you label something, you got to be consistent with it. All right, so now let's start looking at some of the information that's given in it. The year 2000 doesn't really matter for us. It just basically gives us a frame of time because there is no other time frame in the problem. If we did see a transition from 2000 to 2010 or something like that, then I'd be worried about that 2000. But since it's the only year, we'll be thinking about just that year. So what I'm really playing with is that first relationship I see is this right here, the combined. So that word combined up there, combined oldies soundtracks 0.23 million. Okay, so let's take a look at that. One of the recommendations I have for when you're doing word problems is do it in phases, do it in a transition. Don't try and go from the words straight to the equations. First get the relationships out and then we can put it together as an equation. I usually see a lot of errors that happen when I'm working with my students is when they're making too big of a jump before they get really super comfortable with the material. Hey, if you're comfortable with this stuff, go ahead, make as big a jump as you want. But if you're learning this for the first time or you're still uncomfortable with it, then do transitions. And so what I mean by here is I'm just still using the words oldies and soundtracks and then the 0.23 million. I don't really have to go straight to my X, Y's, and Z's because that's just too much to juggle at one time. Okay, so now that I've got my relationship all set up, because I remember the word combined in our context for word problems usually means addition. And so I've got oldies plus soundtracks equals 0.23 million. And so I've got my relationship all ready to go. Then my next step is to put in the appropriate variable. And so in this case, oldies was my X, soundtracks was my Y, and then I got my 0.23 million. And so since X and Y are in terms of millions, I don't have to put all those zeros. Thank goodness I don't have to put all those zeros. That's why equations are really kind of nice and matrices are really nice. We can kind of get around those zeros and stuff and it'll come out actually very cleanly for us. Okay, so that's my first equation that we have. Our next equation that we got to make is based upon the information right here. Country is bringing in or brought in 15 times as much as soundtracks. Okay, so let's put that together. So we're going to look at that relationship. Country 15 times as much as soundtracks. Okay, I want to compare country to soundtracks. That's what we're doing. And the goal here is to make an equation. I want to make these two things equal. So how do I put this? And the thing that's going to make them equal to each other is this 15 times, which basically just means 15 multiplication. But now here's the question. The question is this: do I put the 15 with the country or do I put the 15 with the soundtracks? Oh my gosh, because country, it just gets really confusing. And here's one of those things that actually there's a lot of research on this type of relationship that educators have done. Here's the way that I look at it, and so this usually keeps me going in the right direction. I ask myself, when I get these types of comparisons, who's bigger? Is it country or soundtracks? And so basically in this statement, country is 15 times as much as soundtracks. That's telling me country is bigger. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at. So mentally, I've got country, it's bigger than soundtracks. The key thing is I want to make it an equation. So where do I put the 15? Who do I multiply by 15 in order to make these things equal? Because if I put the 15 with the country, wouldn't that make country even bigger? And so I want to put the 15 with the soundtracks because that's the only way soundtracks and country could be equal is if I multiply 15 to the soundtracks. And so that's kind of the mental game that I play. I figure out who's bigger and that tells me where to put the 15 times. Okay, so now I'm ready to make my equations. Now that I've got the relationship, and I gotta be honest, this is one of these relationships where I see students going from the word straight to the equation before they figure out the relationship. This is where most of them are going to make a mistake. So now that I've got my relationship ready to go, I just put in my letters, put in my variables. And if I remember right, country was Z and soundtracks was Y. And so now I've got my nice equation. Z equals 15Y. It's ready to go for me. I mean, I've got that relationship down. But it's actually, I lied to you, it's not really ready for me because my goal is to make a matrix. And if you may recall your matrix, when we did the translation from equations to matrix, we had all our x's and y's and z's on one side of the equation, and then on the other side was a number. And that's what I got to do here. I've set up the equation z equals 15y. I've got the relationship. Now I want to do one step here to convert it into a form that I could easily translate to a matrix. And what I mean by that, let's bring that 15y over to the left-hand side by subtracting 15y from both sides, and this is the equation that I want to use. And remember, there's a 0 on that right-hand side. So that's the number that I'll be using for my matrix. Okay, so now this equation is ready to go for me to translate into a matrix. Okay, and let's go back to the word problem. We still have some more information that we need to work with, and that would be the revenue from oldies is 30% above soundtracks. So what we've got here is we've got a relationship. We're comparing two things. We're comparing oldies and soundtracks. Okay, oldies and soundtracks. And then also we're playing 30%. So oldies was 30% above, 30% more. So once again, how do I set up this? I mentally go, who's bigger? Oldies bigger, it's 30% bigger. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a 1.3 times soundtrack. You might be wondering, dude, where'd you get the 1.3? Well, if I'm 30%, if oldies is 30% more than soundtracks, then really there's a couple of things going on there. It's 100% of soundtracks plus 30% more. And that means 130%. So remember, oldies is 100% of soundtracks plus 30% more because it's 30% above. And so that's 130%. Decimal version of 130% is 1.3. So I've got soundtracks multiplied by 1.3. And that would make this an equal and make it an equation, make my relationship good. And so then to convert this, remember, oldies was X, soundtracks was Y. And so now I've got my equation. I'm going to convert this into a form that I can convert or translate into a matrix by bringing the 1.3y over to the left side by subtracting, that's why that negative there, and equal to 0. And there's my third equation. So now that I've got all my equations, let's take a look at those equations. So here's my three equations that I made. I have three variables, x, y, and z. So three variables, three equations. I'm good to go. Let's hope this works out. And so then what I want to do now is take these three equations and plug or can translate them into a matrix. So remember this x right here, that's really a 1x, that's really a 1y. And so I'm going to put x's in my first column, y's in my second column, z's in my third column of my matrix. You don't have to do it that way. You could switch it around, but that's just what I'm doing. Just because I'm, kind of a traditional kind of guy, and, I'm just going to keep it as x, y's, and z's. And so to make my matrix, this is what I've got. 1x plus a 1y, 1, 1. There's no z in that first equation, so that's why you see a 0 in that third column there in the z spot. And then for my second equation, there's no x. That's why you're seeing a 0 there for the second row there. And the first column is my x column, and it's got a 0 there. And then for my third equation, there's no z again, so that's why you're seeing another 0 there. And then you got these zeros on the right hand side. They are numbers, so please put them into the matrix. You don't leave it blank. You actually put in your zeros. Okay, so now that we've got our matrix, basically solve this matrix either by hand or using the technology. When you do that, you get a nice solution matrix like this, looking really fine. Remember that this one right here represents x equals 0.13, and in this case this is 0.13 millions of dollars, and that would represent $130,000 for oldies. This second row right here has a 1 in the second column. That's my y value. So I have y equals 0.1. Y was the soundtracks. So 0.1 million. So I'm looking at $100,000 for soundtracks. And in this last row, the one right here is in the z column. So z equals 1.5. But in the context of our situation, z was the revenue for country music. And this 1.5 represents not a $1.50, but a 1,500,000. And so that's what we got, 1,500,000 for country. So there's an example where I didn't make a chart this time is because the information that was given to me was relationships. It was comparing the different variables. It was comparing oldies versus soundtracks, country versus soundtracks, all those kind of things. So in comparisons, I have a difficult time or a challenge to make them into a nice chart. So I just kind of take each comparison individually and make my formulas. And then remember, I take a transition. I first keep on using the words to find the relationship, and then I translate it into an equation with the variables. So please take your time with this, do those transitions, and hopefully it'll be a little bit easier for you. Thanks and have a good day.